for future use. But do want to remind you why we all are here today is to mostly get updates about Russell City and the reparative justice process that's going on right now with the city of Hayward. It's a very fruitful one. It's a very rewarding one. And it's the one that's contentious, right? Because it's a new policy landscape and it's something that hasn't been done before. You know, I'm always in awe and so proud of the apology that was made by the city of Hayward, and in our future news in the meeting, other entities are now starting to apologize for what's going on. And so I really thought it was appropriate at this moment of the process to bring in scholars who really have a large view of what some recommendations could look like to adequately achieve justice for this community. So I'm gonna introduce my good friend, Dr. Marcus Anthony Hunter, who I've met in this journey of trying to actualize reparations. I have kind of subject matter expertise myself in reparations policy implementation, and this is someone who is a leader for all of us and who has developed many scholars in this field and is leading a whole host of initiatives at UCLA to think deeply about what does true justice look like for communities who have been victims of this type of government state-sanctioned violence. So Dr. Marcus Anthony Hunter is here to give us a presentation. If you could please hold all comments and questions until after the presentation. We'll have a 15-minute discussion. You could put questions or comments in the chat and we'll make sure to respond to them one way or another. But Mr. Hunter, are you ready to get your presentation started?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, thank you for being here, brother.
Oh, of course. Shout out to you, Dr. Lynch. You know, like I'm over here like super feeling full circle-ish, seeing you in your doctordom, you know, like
I'm trying, man. I'm
that you
trying.
wanted to do, you know, like that's
yeah.
so amazing, you know, like that's super exceptional. So peace and blessings, everyone. I'm so grateful to be here and in the presence of so many people who are not only descendants, but also people who are dedicated to doing the reparative work in an environment where oftentimes that is not celebrated or saluted. I salute each of you. What I'll do is just sort of talk and I have two stories that I'll share around my own kind of reparations journey, both as like a scholar, but then as a regular schmegular Black person from South Philly and what this all means for me. And then I'll offer you the framework that I use a lot to kind of broaden our imagination and perspective on all that's owed. And then I can just open it up from there. So I won't talk for too long because this is a Zoom experience, you know. Okay, so the first thing that when I think about what you all are up to, it really reminds me of what I discovered now 15 years ago when I started on what became my scholarly research reparations journey. I was working on my dissertation, and my dissertation revisited the Black neighborhood from W.E.B. Du Bois's The Philadelphia Negro. And that book is written in 1899. It's the first Black neighborhood ever recorded in American sociology or social science. It also is like the first book of American sociology, and it's about this Black neighborhood that Du Bois basically captures from 1603 until about 1897. And my general question was like, what happened after 1899? You know, what happened to this neighborhood, this Black community that basically is the first to ever be documented and in this way? And so what I discovered was a whole bunch of stuff happened, including displacement, dispossession, and other things. But among those things that occurred, which I was really surprised by, was 1925, there were two Black banks, Cosmopolitan Bank and Brown and Stevens Bank, that crashed suddenly in 1925, which in many ways comes 4 years ahead of what we all think of as the great stock market crash. And I had no conception of Black banks. Like I heard of them, but definitely not in the 1920s. And as I started going down that journey, I found others like Benga Bank in Chicago. And that led me down this whole path of like, where did these Black banks come from? Like, when did they start? You know, because now if you're in the 20s, you're not that far off from emancipation. So that led me to the year 1865 and the last piece of federal legislation that Abraham Lincoln passed before he was assassinated, which was the Freedmen's Bank Act. It created a national bank for newly freed Black Americans to deposit their money. Make a long story very short, by 1874, there was upwards of $1 billion of Black people's money in this bank. It was so successful, there were 24 branches across the United States. All that to say that March 1874, Frederick Douglass is taken on a tour of this bank. He's so impressed with the headquarters in DC that he deposits what amounts to about $10,000 of his own money. He likely goes home and tells his family about it and, you know, goes to bed like most people. And the next morning he awoke to see that he had been named president of the Freedmen's Bank. He had no idea that that was happening. He was shocked. He goes down to the bank, and within a few months of him being the so-called president of the bank collapses because it has huge debts. Where do those debts come from? Those debts came from the amending of the charter by the US Congress in 1871 that allowed it to become a credit and loan institution in addition to a savings bank because it was so popular, as I said. Unfortunately, what that meant was that white clients received the credit and loans while Black people's money was actually guaranteeing that bank. Ultimately, then fast forward, Frederick Douglass is the president, it's a bank underwater, it shuts down. Up until today, only 60% of those funds have ever been paid out. And by 60%, I don't mean 60% of the people were made whole. I just mean splintered out pieces of that money have gone out. At the same time, it's also evidence of what I saw, which is different from the 40 acres and a mule, and reminds me a lot of Russell City, where it's about damage that really did happen. You know, 40 acres and a mule is about like a promise that was made. You know, it wasn't ever made by Congress and such, but it was a promise. And we spent a lot of our reparations foundation on the promise that was made versus $1 billion of Black people's money or a neighborhood or a community that's dispossessed or displaced. And so that took me in a whole other place about what reparations could be, because up until that point, reparations have been a negative space, a negative conversation. What I mean is it had never happened before. We're always talking about promises that were made but not kept. It's divisive versus the Freedmen's Bank that actually really happened. And that's real money that Black people lost. And I would say some of the most critical money they ever had, because it's what follows you after you're emancipated. So that money is just gone, you know, in less than 10 years. How devastating that must be. And what if we reframed reparations around thinking about that? Because in that moment, you get a national policy that tries to redress slavery through the Freedmen's Bank Act, but then you also see the lack of protections, making it so that that bank is lost. And so that led me into like the big picture of like, oh, what if reparations is also about what you all have been doing, like repairing harms that were done because all slavery did was end, not the institutions and structures that permitted and authorized it. So how can we work in that? And then if we're working in that, what reparations are we owed? So fast forward to then about 12 years into this reparations research journey, you know, I have in my mind, you know, this big picture thing, you know, like definitely that means money, definitely that means political repair, that also means legal repair. That all makes sense now. So now I'm getting to like maybe 4 forms of reparations: political, legal, economic, you know, forms of repair. And so I decided I would follow the full slave trade process, going to different nodes inside each of those experiences. So I went to West Africa, I went to the UK, I went to the Caribbean, I went to South Carolina, I went to Virginia, just to figure out like all of the places that people were going and what was happening along the way. And when I was in the UK, now for people who don't know, Liverpool, which is at the north, most famous for branding and being the hometown of the Beatles. So that's where they're from. But it actually was the headquarters of the UK empire of the slave trade. And so that becomes relevant because they have in Liverpool one of the only slave museums, International Museum for Slavery, where when you walk in, they show you the technology that was used to create slaves. So the bit that was in your mouth, which was an iron grill with a nail-like stake that goes through to keep it closed effectively. So all that to say, you see the chains, you see the whips, you see lynch, you see all of the different technologies used to push people into subhuman bondage. And then I wound up in this town called Morecambe Bay, which is, just south of Liverpool. And when I get there, I discover that there's this little Black boy that they call Sambo, who's buried and dead in a plot in this small place. And this place is so small that twice a day the tide rises so high that it separates it from the mainland of the United Kingdom or England. And so I was like, how did this Black kid wind up in this weird place that most British people don't even come to? And so the story winds up being that he was kidnapped into slavery, and the captain had docked at Lancaster and more in the bay, left him in a pub while he went to go handle some business. All that to say, when he comes back, the boy is just dead. And for over 150 years, they've had a marker there marking it as the boy's name, Sambo. While I'm there, I tell that story to say, I realized something different than just the big picture stuff that we talk about, like the check and these kinds of things, which is relevant for thinking about Russell City. Is this boy lost his smile. Like when you walk into the slave memorial, the first thing they show you is that they put this contraption in your mouth. It just steals your smile. And that made me think, now we're talking about something, I don't know if you can quantify that. Like, how much is your joy? How much is your smile? And also for people who don't know, your smile is the anatomical anchor to your thymus gland system, which helps heal and keep a high immunity. So now when we think about pre-existing conditions and things, that makes like slavery the original pre-existing condition. You can't heal yourself if you cannot smile, which is why the great sociologists Earth, Wind, and Fire have the song On Your Face on the album called Spirit. I bring that up because that immediately said to me, there's such a thing as spiritual reparations. And then that meant that America is this beautiful mansion on a beautiful block, except when you get inside the mansion, there are piles and piles and piles of dirty laundry. And people just act like it's not there. P, political reparations. I, intellectual reparations. L, legal reparations. E, economic reparations. S, spatial reparations, social reparations, and spiritual reparations. And I think part of what I can offer here is to say, whatever you're working on, when we're talking about repair, the origin of the word reparations is repair, right? And people like repair, but when it gets to reparations, it gets weird. And part of why that happens is because the I in repair becomes the TIONS. So all of the grammar school attendees, that basically means a state of something. So when you say exaltation, a state of exalting, reparation, a state of repair, because we're asking for the states, the cities, the governments that authorized and permitted this to repair the damage. And it may actually be constant. It may not just be about a check. It may not just be about legal changes. It may be a perpetual cycle until you can ultimately ensure it never happens again. Thank you. I'll just open it up from there. Happy to chop it up.
No, I appreciate you, Dr. Hunter. I really do. Because when you kind of opened up something really interesting and deep, which is really we're seeking reparations from institutions that were kind of authorized to oppress us, right? Thinking about banking. Mm-hmm. Similar we're trying to understand with the case of Russell City, trying to understand with the urban renewal process and all of the different institutional factors that led to, these people being discarded of, disposed of without any regard for the future generation, intergenerational wealth making. So when we're thinking about spiritual reparations and the deep holes that, these families are having to fill generations after, I really appreciate you speaking on that. And again, that's the work that we're seeking to do together in this process. So just appreciate you kicking us off. And with that being said, I want to make sure, folks who have been in this process or who are curious about what it means to heal from the harm. Do we have any questions or comments for Dr. Hunter? I do want to preface that we will have this section for 15 minutes. We could all keep our comments to a minute. I may give you 15 seconds over, but I'll let you know once you cross that minute mark, just so we can accompany all the comments. So I saw hands before who were up before Dr. Hunter started speaking. But if you have any questions, comments, please raise your hand or put in the chat. I'll go back to Selena, whose hand has been up. Okay, Selena took their hand down. I'm now going to go to Mr. Daniel. You have a minute. Yeah, Mr. Daniel Moreno. You're on mute still, though.
Hello. Did you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I just want to say my family is a very, very big part of Russell City. My dad is actually on the cover of the Images of America book, Russell City. He went to the school where they put all the Blacks, Asians, and Mexicans in.
Hmm.
And my family was kicked out of Russell City. They had a big part, land and everything. My grandfather came from Mexico to live out here. And I have a big family. So I just wanted to say that. So if you guys could help me with getting more information on my family, I would appreciate about that. Because my dad went to this school, so I'm pretty sure they would have what's it called? I'm sorry, I have epilepsy. I just had a seizure last week, so it's hard for me to speak my words.
No, I understand you.
I'm pretty sure they have history still of my dad going to that school and everything. And my dad actually fought in the Korean War. My dad had me at 53 years old, and my mom was 25. My dad had 22 kids.
Yes.
He took care of every one of his kids except for two that he had in Korea that wouldn't let him bring back from the war because he had them in Korea.
So
But
yeah,
yeah,
Mr. Moreno, we'll have definitely opportunities for family histories and to share specifically everyone's relocation stories, because they need to be heard so we can understand the full story. So I'll talk
yeah,
about that a little later in the presentation,
yeah. I
and
just want to get a
appreciate
little
your
help.
comment.
Yeah, I just
Cool.
want to get a little bit help to try to get a little bit more history on my dad and that school.
Got you. We're gonna get everybody's history, as much as we can. So thank you for sharing.
All right.
And then Miss Belda 209, is that you? I see your hand up.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Dr. Hunter, that was a wonderful presentation.
Oh,
Yes, very enlightening regarding the psychological harm, because I do find that in our dealings among ourselves, the lynch strategy and all of that, we are still suffering. We are suffering. We're walking wounded soldiers. And I'm wondering, in your research, are there some strategies that can be included to help the psychological healing? Because as our race, when you look at the Jewish people, the Chinese people, et cetera, they have cultural methodologies and cultural practices that unify them. And we've been stripped of those cultural practices outside of the ones that we have recreated via Kwanzaa and Juneteenth, et cetera. Right. So are there methodologies that you are aware of, Dr. Hunter? Because I think the healing process needs to go deep from the wounds that have been inflicted in our DNA as a result of the slave trade.
That's totally right. And I really appreciate what you said, because the back title of my book is Healing the Soul of a Nation. And part of what you bring up is the importance of healing, and how healing is basically the foundation to any kind of repair. But unfortunately, that part always sounds less interesting to people. Like, it sounds less like the PPP loan of it all, like it sounds Like, you know, what does that mean? You know, but it is so foundational. And in fact, I don't know if everyone is familiar. I'm sure there are people here, but there's a book called A Course in Miracles. And there is a line in it that says, I'm going to shorten it, but it's healing is reparation. So also to understand what things really are, that if you don't have the opportunity to heal from the trauma, then it makes sense that trauma reemerges. The other thing, essentially too, and this is about just how reparations gets framed, when Black people or Black Africans were made into or imagined as not human, so too was some aspect of what America is. And so for whatever reason, people don't really embrace or lean into the relational field that the African-American experience has with the possibilities of what America could be. How can you be anything when you don't attend to fixing the category that created slavery? You know, like you have to do work around that. So for me, a lot of it is one, representing and offering education about what were the spiritual cosmologies and religious practices that were lost due to being trafficked as a human being and brought to another country, and then having other religions imposed on you, you know, just so that people understand that like people come from belief systems. They come from ancient belief systems that give them access to a whole bunch of things. And they're not just, you know, they're not unworthy of being brought forward. So some of it is on things like that. So when I say spiritual, it is also literally about recovering religions that have been lost, you know, and practices that have been lost, so that people are not always left to do it on their own, and to treat them as, you know, worthy objects of history and practice. The other part about it, some things I say are like, we often talk about how we live in capitalism, or we live in this consumer-driven society, whatever your favorite vernacular is. But basically is that, you know, money matters. And I'm sure if I did like everybody's cameras on, show of hands, you know, how many people have stress or, you know, anxiety when it comes to issues of money or finance? You know, on some level of your life, you'll be able to raise your hand. So this is also why, to me, some of this is about the kinds of monies that don't require money in hand, which is debt relief. You know, when I was at the California Reparations Commission meeting, I said to them, I mean, Black people could wake up tomorrow with like an 800 plus credit score, and it would be no skin off of anybody's teeth. It would just be easy, because that's just a digital reality that also keeps us in a class that is not able to have access to all sorts of things like loans, business loans, home loans, and such. That's another way of repairing some of the psychological harm, is because we inherit debt. We're not able to make money and get ahead. Or then when we do, we get tons of college loans or whatever that process is. That what if you could just relieve the stress of debt from people's lives? And what is the psychological impact of that? And I imagine that to be like extremely beneficial.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
No, you gave your all on that one. But the healing process does need to go deep. And I think, you know, as the brave descendants have been a part of this process, there's probably a lot of fields. I mean, it's 60 years of government neglect, gaslighting, and again, really proud of the subcommittee members every day, because, you know, it takes a lot to show up in this process and, you know, to do the semantics and the logistics of it all, but how are we making sure the healing work is ultimately getting done?
Yeah, I totally love that. And that reminds me of like, you know, I tend to be an optimist. So I'm the person who probably comes and we have these kind of conversations, and I seem like I'm going to leave you with the vibe like, he really thinks it's all good. You know, like, is he crazy? But it's mostly because there is a form of social reparations happening by the fact that we're having this conversation. Like, we were not even allowed to talk about it at all. And now it's actually like in newspapers. And no, that's not the end result, but it is showing me that we're moving towards something that is much more fulfilling. And in fact, when I see descendants listed, I see like Fred Falcon, Mary Cota chose you to represent her in this moment where maybe she can get some justice that she can't physically be here for, but she is spiritually present. I see Sasani Smith, Buster Brooks chose you to represent their injustice and get the justice that they're not able to get in physical form. So just when I hear descendants, oftentimes I feel that category is always made to seem like such a painful, injurious category, which it is in terms of like pain and injury is how you get paid in a lawsuit. Like that makes sense. But on another level, you've been chosen to represent this cause in a time where we're finally seeing people moving forward on it. So that it's not just like you're a crazy person and you get to say their names. And I hope you continue to say them loud and proud, get one of them good old family reunion t-shirts with a big bust of their face on the front, and you show up for them every time because they are cheering you on and they chose you to represent them in this fight that they were not able to be physically present to win, but they're spiritually cheering you all on because they've chosen you all to be that community that was lost. So I am in deep honor to be in the presence of so many people who have been chosen. And I use that language very intentionally because I feel like as Black people and as poor people and as people of color, rarely ever have we been told we were chosen for anything other than slavery, detention camps, immigration policies, so on and so forth. But to be chosen to be a bastion of justice and truth and repair for legacies and generations that weren't able to see it, I think is one of the most powerful signs that love is real.
Mm-hmm. Come on, brother. Come on. Now that you're taking us there. I got one more comment question from Miss Artavia Berry. And this is actually a phenomenal woman who was instrumental in the apology that the city of Hayward gave to the Russell City descendants. So just wanted to give you your space, madam.
Thank you, Dr. Lynch. And first, greetings to all the elders and descendants. God bless you. May peace be with you as you walk through this process. I am so intrigued, Dr. Hunter, by your analysis, and particularly as someone who was ordained at around 15 years old, hearing you articulate the spiritual ramifications of what our people endured. So salute to you for seeing that and naming it. I have a bit of a question comment for you, and it might actually be two questions.
Sure.
Yeah, so the first is I've been studying this concept from a professor out at DePaul University in Chicago around post-traumatic slave syndrome, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So talking about, not only the impact of being robbed from our land, but then being held as slaves for so long, and coming out of it, and some of the practices that came out of that with us that were really born as survival mechanisms, right? So things like what we eat, right? What we drink, how we treat our children, right? So sometimes you see in those days, parents or grandparents or caretakers talking harshly to their children, but it was more to protect them, as a protective measure against quote unquote master, and how that has endured today. But we don't necessarily have the understanding of why our ancestors were doing those things and the harm that it's continued to cause in generations that move forward. And when I think about the mental health, like the state of mental health amongst our people, you talked about stress. I'm asking you about the connection between post-traumatic slave syndrome and some of those practices. I'm wondering if you could help us imagine how we might make those connections and think about recommendations that would provide ongoing generational support, because these things didn't happen in one generation, right? There's been multiple generations where these things have impacted us, the stress levels, the abuse, a lot of things that we've seen. How do we set up policy recommendations that can endure for generations of support and healing? Because we know it's not going to stop with us, right? We're a part of a long process, but we want to make sure that we're thinking about our elders now, their descendants now, but also the generations that come behind us. So I'd love to hear your reflections on that.
Yeah, thank you so much. And shout out to Dr. Joyce DeGruy always on every time I hear that, I'm like, that's the OG. I think on the first tip, part of what is important to me is that we don't have, with any kind of radical repair, which is what I favor, that we don't actually have an end in mind. You know, like we're not going and then we'll go 5 years from now and then everybody will be good. I think starting from a place that like what happened was unspeakable and unforgivable. So what happens is something that is much more continuous. So in terms of policy, oftentimes that might be about renewals, like, you know, making sure that there's language about renewing any kind of policy, or making sure that like there's a way to keep things going. So you can always have like bylaws or policies that help to like make sure you can't just shut it down. You know, like, oh, nobody came to this one meeting after we instituted it, and that according to our policy, we didn't have to do it anymore. Or if we don't hear in 30 days from a descendant, where, you know, so just being mindful about the different ways that you can have policy language that keeps the process open and continuous. And not open and continuous from the place of like, you should feel so guilty and so bad, you know, like, no, you should just understand that like the goal isn't to try to erase the harm that was done, but to acknowledge, recognize it, and prevent it from happening again. And so that reminds me of like something that oftentimes I know I learned in the therapy space from a really great Black woman therapist. When I first met her, she was saying, you know, so I'm not one of these people who's going to tell you, you know, you come to me, we'll work out some stuff, and before you know, all of the bad stuff or the dysfunction, it'll just be gone, you know. And she would be like, what you can do is like plant seeds for a tree that will be taller than the dysfunctional tree. You know, basically that's the goal, that you can plant seeds and water it so that it rises taller than the thing that had us going, versus the dismantling language, which that is going to be something that makes me a little different. I think that dismantling, while a worthy project and concept, is not necessarily a useful amount of energy and time for those of the living. You know, when you're of living, we always hear tomorrow's not promised. So why are we spending all of today dismantling rather than building? And so I go back to my interpretation of the great philosopher, theologian, you may have heard of her before, Audre Lorde. And the passage off quoted is, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. What's interesting about that is that people talk about that a lot and you see it quoted all the time. But my interpretation of that is dismantling is not a worthy opponent. It is not worth our collective energy and time. And on top of that, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house because he did not build it, okay? He didn't build it. It means that our tools, the builders, the people who built master's house, can do that work. So it's also about us understanding our opportunity. And when you get traumatized, and this is what the post-traumatic slave syndrome reminds us, that like you can get into a place of vengeance now that you have the power. You know, now you want to, before you know, you're doing what was done to you, which is in some ways justified. But if we're trying to build up something that is bigger and bolder than what we had, we don't want the same old. We want something new. So that means that we have to be very mindful and very self-aware that at all times, we are not going to be lured in a trap that is only about dismantling, because that is a disservice to us. We need to build up something. And that's part of the legacy of emancipation, is nothing was ever built up. It's all piecemeal. It's all 100 years apart, 50 years here, 20 years here, not directly for Black people, not directly for Native Americans. So this is why we're in this piecemeal reality where we never had a wall built up. And just to the whole ordainedness, I'll just come to this and say, every time that the children of Israel were brought back to Israel, they built a wall. They built a wall. So that is saying to me that you need that in order to deal with the wall that failed and let all of the oppression and all of the systemic racism over the top, because people are still climbing it just the same. So that's my mindset about these things, is what can you all as a community do to build a wall that's taller than them trying to do it again, climbing that same wall, doing that same process? How can you keep their policy open to renewal and recertification, like those kinds of languages, you know, like using the RE. I love it, you know, like refund, you know, us, you know, renew things, give us a release of things, you know, like just thinking about those words, those RE words, and see how you can make those into policy. And I'm telling you, you all will also be a lighthouse for all of these communities across the country that have been afraid to do what y'all are doing, then also don't think it's possible. And then they get to witness you all doing it, and they will certainly follow your lead.
Come on, brother. I can't. Thank you. Mic drop. Did that answer your question, Ms. Berry?
Absolutely. And brother, I'll be looking for you after this call
Okay.
because I love what you're saying to us. And again, just really grateful to be here with the survivors and descendants to think about, generational healing is
Mhm.
what you're talking about. And want to make sure that we're thinking about those who are coming behind us in those ways that you described and having some concrete ideas around how we make sure it's today, it's 10 years from now, it's 50 years from now, the same way they tried to
Mhm.
piecemeal us. We're going to put together a long-term strategy like the Japanese do. They look 100, 200 years out and say,
Mhm.
okay, how is this going to impact the entire race? So thank you so much, Dr. Lynch, and thank you, Dr. Hunter, for being here.
Yeah.
Oh,
God bless
yes, one love. Thank you. And Mr. Hunter, you have time for one more question?
you. Sure.
Okay, Miss Vina, you are last one, and then we're gonna close out with some updates. And I hope y'all feel spiritually fed, fired up, and ready to get this Russell City process started. So, Miss Vina, you still ready?
Absolutely. Thank you. This is just a comment and a thank you for offering that. I did have a question initially, but I think Artavia tagged on that very well because my question was, and you definitely answered it, is how do we renew our upcoming descendants and how do we share what happened, because we know that it was so painful that some of our ancestors won't even talk about it.
Right.
That's why a lot of our history gets lost, is because it is so painful. And that secondary trauma is real.
Come on.
And how do we share it without continuing that secondary trauma? And I think that you attacked it very well with the renewing of what we can share and how we share it. So I appreciate that. Thank you. No questions, just a comment. I appreciate you all. Thank you, doctors.
Thank you. Thank you.
For sure. Well, I think we are activated, y'all. Y'all feeling the turn? Y'all feeling what's possible with this movement? Russell City, it's a time to be alive right now. And again, I just want to say thank you, Dr. Marcus Anthony Hunter, for sharing your space and time with us. I appreciate it so much. This probably won't be our last time. We got so much work to do, and you'll be proud of the work that we'll produce.
Oh, I'm sure. This is amazing already. Peace to y'all, peace and love. May, God continue to protect you all on this journey. And please know that as you all lift, we are climbing right behind you. And there's so many communities that are looking at what y'all are doing. So please never feel isolated or alone.
Mm-hmm. Ashe, ashe, ashe for the ancestors. Thank you.
Peace, everybody.
Peace. So as we transition, I'm gonna kind of close out our meeting with just to giving you an overview of where we are in our process as the Russell City Restorative Justice Project and the steering committee, that we are tasked with providing a set of recommendations to the city of Hayward, and we're in that process. We're moving and grooving. Like I said, my name is Dr. Kirby Lynch with Series Policy Research, really, again, providing project management support to just get the community to the finish line. But these people have been working hard, thinking through very high level concepts related to reparations, really trying to figure out how to tell our story, and really trying to understand how to deliver the bill, how to write the resolution to achieve the justice we know our community deserves. So I'm just going to close out this meeting, just giving you an update to our thought process that's occurring right now, and really give you some insight to the ways that you can contribute eventually in this process. I know many people are like, when am I going to have the opportunity to share my family story? When are we going to, meet up? All of that is coming. I believe since Series has been a part of this process, we've really taken seriously deep relationship building with the committee members, really taken seriously the history, and then just, again, I'm so honored and humbled to be a part of this project. So again, our task as a subcommittee is to create a set of recommendations and to deliver it to the city of Hayward about what it means to heal. And so when we're thinking about that process, it's all through the framework of damages. We want to let everybody know that damages have been done. to the residents who live there and to also the families that survived that encounter of being relocated forcibly and without consent, and due to the pressures of the urban renewal process, right? So when we're presenting our recommendations, our first step has always been to really understand the problem. So in our research process and our working together as a group, we have gained a thorough understanding of the neglect and the damages experienced by individuals in Russell City due to the absence of county, city, and municipal services. That is the deep problem at hand, the neglect that residents were facing while living in the Russell City and the different county, city, and municipal partners that were participating in that. After that, we're going to go into identifying contributing factors. So we're going to be like, okay, specifically, what were the factors that contributed to the neglect and damages in unincorporated areas? Some of the variables are thinking about the availability and adequacy of essential services like water, sewage, and street infrastructure in Russell City. We're also going to think about the quality of services provided, including maintenance, accessibility, and responsiveness. And when we just think generally about who lived in Russell City, thinking about the majority of it being people of color, and that the majority of it was children of color, right? Thinking about the characteristics of the affected population is really going to give us some insights into how we're articulating damages. And so where do the descendants and their families come into play? That is what we are working on as a group right now. We just finished up a retreat, really bonding as a group. And we, again, are all about collaborating with our community and getting the full story. So there will be months, we're aiming towards August, September, October, to start connecting with you all in the community to gather the evidence. We want to gather a diverse range of evidence to support the claims that we have related to neglect and damages. This looks like testimonials from Russell City residents. We want to hear your personal experiences and the challenges that your family faced due to the lack of county, city, and municipal services. We want to hear your story. We want to know if there's any official reports or studies conducted on Russell City. We found studies done in 1930s, 40s, 50s about Russell City. So what has been people's understanding of the neglect and how different government actors didn't respond? We're also looking at data demonstrating disparities between residents at the time who lived in the city of Hayward and those that lived at Russell City, just to show the sheer inequality. And finally, and seriously, we're looking at documentation and incidences or accidents related to fire and other water service issues that resulted from the absence of county services. So when we're thinking about evidence, we want to hear from your family. We'll have various mechanisms for that to happen, a survey, town halls. And so please keep supporting our movement because those opportunities will be coming available and we want to get it from you all so we can have it be a part of our process. And after we get the information, we're going to analyze the evidence collectively as a group, and we're going to understand how the evidence provides credibility to our story of neglect and damages. And once we're done analyzing that evidence, we're going to compile it into a report and have that report delivered to the Hayward City Council, which will again provide the recommendations to show how to heal the harm that was caused on this community. And so all of this is rooted in a movement. Again, want to thank Dr. Marcus Anthony Hunter for coming, because it's not just about what we're doing here. We're looking at the international landscape, the national landscape for reparations. We take this movement seriously, and the research is going to be utilized to make Russell City its own unique model for other cities to follow. It's a very nice time to just be in this work. I do want to shout out the Russell City Reparative Justice project. They showed up in full force yesterday. There was a resolution passed by Alameda County apologizing for the harm caused to the impacted families due to the seizure and destruction of Russell City. Don't know if y'all knew that, but again, just as of yesterday, the County of Alameda apologized for their role in the forced relocation and displacement of Russell City families. So what this again provides is an opportunity for our movement here in the city of Hayward to actualize our recommendations and really get justice for our families. So all of this compounding And with all of the energy we're feeling today and our motivation for spiritual reparations, anything is possible. And if you haven't seen this really amazing clip on NBC News, Russell City is getting national exposure, y'all. So I'm gonna put this link in the chat for you all to look at. But we have some of our subcommittee members on a Meet the Press outlet, 12-minute video about what Russell City was and the impact. It even comes with a article about Russell City. So all of this news and media exposure to Russell City is just, again, communicating that Russell City and this justice movement is here to stay. So again, those are pretty much the updates for our community. Our next public meeting will be July 26th. And July 26th at 6 p.m., you will hear more about our community engagement strategies that will be rolling out in August and September and ways your family can get involved. But if you have any additional comments from this meeting or you want to share information, please email us at russellcity-rjp@hayward-ca.gov. This goes straight to the Russell City committee members. I filter them out, I look at them, so every email gets read. So stay in contact. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to stop the recording here or pause it. But